Now, the ramifications of Trump's electoral victory go far beyond America's borders amid two raging wars and tensions in the Indo-Pacific region.
So for more on what a second Trump term means for Asia in particular, we're now joined by Alex Holmes, who is the Regional Director for the Asia Pacific at the EIU. Alex, thank you very much for joining us on the show this morning. So I want to start by, what you expect Trump's second term, what Trump 2.0 is going to be like. I mean, we've heard a lot of, campaign rhetoric over the past 2 years. Is he really going to be what he said he would be while on the campaign trail, you think?
Well, therein lies all of the uncertainty, really, because, Trump says a lot of things. And I remember there was a phrase from his first presidency that was take him seriously, but not literally. And you've got to remember that he's no longer a political novice. He was never really probably a details man, but in broad strokes, he knows how things work now. The second thing to think about is who he surrounds himself with. The Republican Party looks very different from what it did about 8 years ago. And there's no longer, quote unquote, the adults in the room.
To keep him,
constrained.
Manner of speaking. Constrained is probably a better word. I guess the question for Asia that I have for you is being transactional going to define Donald Trump? And in the context of Asia, should Asian countries, Asian leaders always be prepared, when they go in a meeting with Trump or, his associates to say, look, this is what we can offer you, as an Asian country. And we hope that we can have some sort of an alliance or some sort of cooperation going. Is that going to define his foreign policy for Asia?
Yeah, I think very much Donald Trump is not a pure ideologue. He's transactional in the way he views things. So, as you mentioned, Asian countries, they have agency. They're not going to stand still, and how they react to Trump is also going to be a very important determinant of the overall impact of his presidency on Asia. So, for instance, if we look back at his previous term, Japan's then Prime Minister, was actually very successful in courting Donald Trump and managed to secure many exemptions to some of his tariffs. So we expect those kind of moves to be made by Asian governments and also businesses as well over the coming months and quarters in anticipation of Donald Trump's moves.
You have to learn how to play golf.
Yes, learning to play golf would be very good, yeah.
Which countries in particular, I mean, you mentioned Japan, but in Asia in particular, excluding China, would be most exposed to Trump's, no-nonsense, zero-sum approach to when it comes to security and also on trade?
Yeah, so broadly, you can think of three kind of main avenues. There are many more, but three main avenues through which Donald Trump would affect Asia. So the first is on security alliances. The second is on trade. Obviously, Asia is very dependent on global trade. And the third is on kind of how domestic monetary policy spills over to the rest of the world. So quickly to go through that, Japan, South Korea are most exposed on security. Taiwan, of course, as well. On trade, it's the most trade-dependent economies. So apart from China, here in Singapore, we're really exposed. Malaysia, Vietnam, amongst others. And then in terms of the effect of US domestic policy, Trump's policies of the US domestic economy, that's going to create a strong dollar. It may cause the Fed to stop cutting rates or at least slow down its easing cycle. So that's going to hurt countries where they're particularly concerned about their currency. Indonesia, for example. Japan, the yen has sold off amongst a strong dollar. And then, of course, the stressed kind of South Asian countries like Bangladesh, Pakistan, Sri Lanka, and the Maldives.
So South Asia, would you say they're a bit more isolated from the impact of Trump?
Certainly India seems to be relatively isolated. India doesn't depend on external trade a lot for its GDP. And it seems to have Modi seems to have a relatively good relations with Donald Trump. It's really the small South Asian countries that we would be worried about in a strong dollar era.
Who obviously have less leverage as well. I want to ask you in the context of what he said about tariffs in particular. Obviously, I think this is going to be a worry for most Asian countries, in particular the more open ones that we just talked about. Will Asia actually have an answer when Trump says, look, what's in it for me? Otherwise, I'm going to extend that 20% blanket tariff, whatever the final figure he comes up with. Is there, if you like, a defense or something that Asian countries should be ready to offer, that can offer, if you like?
Yeah. Well, firstly, to go back to the question of tariffs, I mean, we talked about will he enact all of his policies? And I think most markets and most people are working on the assumption that he's not going to go the full way. He's not going to put 60% on China, 20% on the rest of the world. Well, for the reasons we talked about earlier about him not being a novice, that may or may not be a correct assumption. So firstly, we've got to see how big the tariff shock is. But certainly Asian countries will look to kind of preempt this and to try and think of ways to minimize the impact. So things that they've done before, for instance, is purchases of US agricultural or energy commodities to try and placate Donald Trump's obsession with bilateral trade deficits. Another thing he's going to be really hot on is third countries that are supposedly trying to help China get around US tariffs, right? So
the 2+1 program, for
exactly.
example, right?
So Vietnam was at the center of kind of transshipment trades early on in Trump's presidency last time. So they may take preemptive steps to try and stop that to hopefully not get as much blowback.
But given the tariff is one of the sort of a continuation when it comes to policies for Trump, would you say that, I mean, I want to know about the time frame. How quickly do you think he will impose them?
Again, another source of great uncertainty, right? So previous tariffs under Section 232 and others, they had to launch an investigation first into kind of unfair trade practices. And then they enacted tariffs on steel and aluminium or on China after kind of an investigation. So that takes a bit of time, And we also expect that there'll be a bit of pushback, through Congress, through the business community. The strength of that, there are risks around that.
So it could take months.
We could be looking probably kind of late 2025.
Late 2025.
So there are risks around that. There are different legal avenues that Trump could use to try and bring them in quicker. And also we should be looking out at trade and not misreading the signals, because importers are going to front load. They're going to try and get ahead of tariffs. They'll build up inventories. And so the trade data may look really nice over the coming
I have a final one on what, Asia and the world can expect from Trump. I mean, the US is a superpower, obviously has, I guess you can call it hard power and soft power. Are we, with Trump in power, are we past that stage where the US is, I suppose, less likely to use soft power in terms of extending aid, for example, or having some sort of a Marshall program, rebuilding program? Is that era kind of like past for now, and it's going to be all about, the more tangible things, the more, I guess, the things which Trump can say, look, okay, I like this deal.
Yeah, I mean, certainly kind of that kind of altruistic or forward-looking behavior doesn't fit into Trump's ideological worldview or even transactional worldview. So, yeah, we probably wouldn't be expecting much of that over Trump presidency. I think the key question is how much a second Trump presidency further frays the kind of multilateral institutions and the rules-based order on which countries like Singapore, have been a massive beneficiary of. So that's really, I think, the worry. Can we survive another Trump presidency in terms of the rules-based order? And we're definitely entering or have entered a more multipolar world. It's no longer Pax Americana. But what does the world look like when there's several powers and America kind of shrinks back from its role?
And we've got a couple of more months until Trump returns to the White House. I guess we'll have to wait and see. Thank you very much for coming in today, Alex. Alex Holmes, Regional Director for Asia Pacific at the EIU.